In this episode, we're talking all about podcast monetization in a way you probably haven't heard of before. Most podcasts rely on ads, sponsorships, or selling something in the back end to make money. But what if the podcast itself was the product? Well, in this episode, I'm sitting down with Ellen Yin, the host of the Cubicle to CEO podcast, to talk all about her new monetization strategy that most podcasters haven't even considered yet, which is a premium podcast. After nearly 7 years of publishing free content and over 400 episodes, Ellen has made the shift to moving her podcast episodes behind a paywall. She has, like I said, over 400 episodes, over 1 million downloads. So if you've ever wondered if your podcast can become its own business model or what happens when you stop relying on ads for your show, this conversation is really going to open your eyes. I am thrilled to be talking with Ellen. I actually share a really funny story at the end, so I can't wait for you to listen. Welcome to the Podcast Café, where we're serving up everything you need to know about podcasting, from tips, stories, and strategies for podcasters from podcasters. I'm your host, Haley Hayhurst, the founder of Espresso Podcast Production, a full-service podcast agency helping business owners, creatives, and thought leaders launch and grow their shows. Whether you're just starting out or want to take your podcast to the next level, this is the place for you. Each week, we'll dive into practical tips, actionable strategies, and of course, stories from other podcasters so that you can build up a podcast that you love and that works for your business. So grab your coffee, get comfortable, and let's get started. Welcome to the Podcast Cafe. Hey, Ellen, welcome into the Podcast Cafe. I am thrilled to have you here.
Hey, Haley, so excited to be here. By the way, I love the nuances in branding, and I really like that you just said welcome in to the Podcast Cafe because it just gives that experience and those vibes. And by the way, your background, I was going to compliment you even before we hit record. It literally feels like I'm sitting in a cafe right now. So happy to be here.
Thank you. That is the goal of this. And I think you're going to love this first question. Also being in the PNW, since we're in the Podcast Cafe, what is your go-to coffee order?
Ooh, okay. So this depends on which coffee shop I go to lately. So recently, my husband and I actually bought a brick and mortar retail store in downtown Corvallis, where I grew up and went to university. And just down the street, there is this place called Coffee Culture, and they have the best white mocha I have ever had in my life. So that is my latest addiction.
Oh my gosh. Okay, that sounds so good. And congrats on that purchase. I saw that on social media and I was like, Ellen, how do you do all of these things? This is amazing.
Thank you. I mean, sometimes I am losing my head, but it is so fun. I'm actually headed to the store after we finish this interview. It's like First Fridays downtown. And so we're participating in the Friday Lights event tonight. So it'll be fun to switch my brain to a different type of work after this.
Yeah. Okay, that's so exciting. Well, we're here to talk about Cubicle to CEO. You've had a big shift in your business and you treat your podcast like a media company, which is amazing. I think this is something that a lot of the conversations I've been having with new podcasters has been around of like, what is a podcast anymore?
Yeah.
Right? I got started when I was in college and video was like not a thing. And getting a podcast up onto Apple Podcast, Spotify was not as easy as it is now.
Correct.
So it's shifting, right? You've been doing this for over 4 years. Tell us a little bit about the evolution of Cubicle to CEO.
Yeah. You're right. It's changed a lot, even in the years that, since I've started. So it's actually, I think, been over, what is it? Almost 7 years now, not over, but almost 7 years. I started this podcast in the summer of 2019. And when I first started it, Cubicle to CEO as a brand already existed. It was actually the name of my coaching program, which I since retired in 2023 when I evolved our company into a media business model rather than like a coaching business model. But anyways, the podcast started kind of as a passion project. I love interviewing people. I've always really loved that particular type of work. In fact, in college, I originally went to school for broadcast journalism. And so I just thought this is a cool way to kind of play out something that I've always wanted to do. And I didn't have any specific vision for what this podcast would be in terms of its role in my business. Now, of course, recording this in 2026, this podcast has become our flagship product. It is truly the product front facing that we are selling to our subscribers, but also before we introduced the premium subscription at the beginning of this year, this podcast has published over 400 episodes for free. So we have a very wide library content, right, for all these resources that we've created over the years. And so it's evolved a lot, Haley. And you're right, the video piece is funny because I have very clear memories of like my very first episodes. I used to record them on my laptop. I had a Blue Yeti mic, so nothing fancy like what you're seeing on video now. And I do remember many of my original episodes were recorded sitting on the floor of my living room, and I would just prop my laptop on the sofa cushion. And so it's very haphazard, very like video, like you said, was just not common. And so it was kind of nice. I do miss that era of podcasting sometimes where video wasn't so integral because it I don't know, it just felt like you could really truly show up as you were that day without having to put on a face or, anything like that.
Yeah, I got started, like I said, in college, and we had these podcast studios that absolutely you could not record video in. Like, it was just like a black box, basically.
Yeah.
So it has changed a lot. And what I love about your podcast is because you ask those questions that you really can't Google, right? You're asking those questions to CEOs, you're telling case studies, all of these things that you can't Google. How did you approach that in the beginning?
When I first started interviewing, I didn't have the really refined structure that our show has become known for now. And by the way, it always impresses me and makes me so happy when people know the tagline to our show. So thank you for sharing that. We ask founders the business questions you can't Google. But in the beginning, it was not structured like that. It really more was like a typical business podcast that you hear where it's just two people having some sort of conversational chat, like a coffee style chat. And so I kind of went into each interview with just curiosity, which is one of my natural superpowers. And so we still got some really great content from that. But it wasn't until I think end of 2022, right before we fully shifted into a media business model in 2023, where I got really, really serious about making sure that our content was different than other business podcasts. So my producer and I went through this whole process of trying to figure out like what's our unique factor? Like why would someone listen to a guest on our show versus, if they've done a media tour of like 10 other podcasts recently, what are they going to hear that's different on our show that they haven't already regurgitated like a billion times on other people's shows? And so what we discovered is a lot of founders when they go on shows or entrepreneurs, leaders, what have you, they typically are either doing a press tour for like a very specific thing, like a book launch, or they are asked over and over and over again about their founder story, right? Like, how did you start your company? What challenges have you faced? Like, what are your best tips for people who are doing XYZ? And all of that is great. And there's nuance, obviously, in how they might answer it for each show and each audience. But overall, their talking points are more or less the same. And so what we wanted to do is bring in case study style interviews where we specifically would do a lot of research ahead of the interview. And basically, for every interview, we ask a guest, what is a strategy you've experimented with or implemented in your business in the last 3 to 18 months? So it has to have happened in like the last year and a half. And actually grew your business successfully in one of 4 categories. So either it grew your revenue profits, it grew your audience, it grew your team, or it grew your time. So it has to fit in at least one of those 4 categories. Sometimes it, fulfills more than one. And then we get really nitty-gritty granular into just the implementation of that particular strategy. Like exactly what did you do? What were the results? What were the data and metrics and financial numbers surrounding, this experiment. And so I think because we made that shift, I think that really was when our podcast kind of gained more momentum because people started to really understand what we were for as a show and looked forward to being able to tune in every Monday to that particular format of interview.
Yeah, I think that is so cool because there's a lot of podcasts out there that do tell the same stories. And so finding your edge, finding what makes it
Mhm.
different, and people come back when they're enjoying the show and people come back when they're learning things. That's
Mm.
like the number one reason people listen to podcasts. So I love that you found that and it works. And now
Mm.
what you're doing in this next era, as we're talking about
Yeah.
podcast eras, in this next era is all about premium podcasting. So those episodes that you just mentioned are now your paid version of the podcast. You're still putting out free content. And like you said, there's over 400 episodes of case studies that people can go and listen to still. But tell us about this premium model because I think it's going to become more popular as the years go on.
Thank you. I agree, and especially with the rise of platforms like Substack and Patreon, I think creating really niche private communities and creating like very niche private content is really where I see media going, right? And so I'm glad to kind of we always say on our podcast, we feature guests who go first. Like all of the experiments and case studies we cover on our show, it's like our guests take the risk of going first. Sometimes they fall flat on their faces, sometimes it works out really well. But either way, our listeners are able to borrow what worked and utilize it, right? So, same thing here. Like I'm testing something that isn't super common right now, I would say, in my little corner of the internet at least. And so there is a lot of learning to be done here, and we're not going to get it perfect right out the gate. But what really inspired this shift is that, like I said, we've been producing content for free for 6 years, and we've, outside of I think one brief hiatus that we intentionally took, we haven't missed a Monday in 6+ years, and that takes an extraordinary amount of time and financial resources to make happen. That's, I think, another misconception of podcasting that a lot of people may not understand, especially if you, let's say, only interact with people who do podcasts as a hobby. It's very expensive. It's free content for most people to consume, but it is not free to make. And so yes, you can subsidize that with ad revenue and sponsorships, which we have, but it isn't as large of a revenue stream as people may think, unless your show is truly one of the largest shows in the world. Like if you're a Call Her Daddy or like, Diary of a CEO or something like that. But outside of those mega shows, it is quite difficult to monetize a podcast unless you're either doing insane numbers or you are utilizing your podcast as a marketing channel to sell into your own high ticket services or products on the back end, like courses and whatnot. And for the last number of years, like 3+ years since retiring from coaching, I have not been selling into anything. So, like, our content on the podcast truly is the product, and we treat it with the same care that we would of producing a paid course. Our podcast is like a paid course. It's just like broken down into mini, master classes every single week. And so we were trying to think about the future of our podcast and like, how can we make the show sustainable and how can we make sure that we're still around in another, 6+ years? And so for us, it made the most sense to really start to build a subscriber revenue model and say, hey, if like 25% or more of my week is going towards producing this piece of content and we're paying staff members to help, like besides myself, there's 2 other staff members that are involved every single week in getting the content out. Like if we're going to be able to, at the minimum, cover the wages for all 3 of us to be able to produce this and then hopefully also make a profit eventually, we need a more sustainable revenue model. And that's why we decided to test the premium subscription so that we could try that and then also invest further into up-leveling the level of content that our listeners are getting through maybe paying speaker fees, let's say, for more premium guests that they otherwise wouldn't have access to, or paying for studio time. Like I'm going to New York at the end of this month and I'm planning to rent a studio to do some in-person interviews. Things like that cost money, and I wouldn't have been able to invest in that if I didn't have, funding for the podcast.
Yeah, some of these studio rental fees are pretty high for
Yeah.
sure. And currently you're podcasting in your house, correct?
Yes. So what you see behind me is my home office. Have it branded to look more like a studio, but yeah, it's just me in my home.
I love it. And I love the new model. And when you started thinking about this as a media company in 2023, is this something that you had in the back of your mind? Like, oh, we're going to monetize this in this way one day? Or I know I was listening to one of your episodes before, and you were saying some of the sponsorship deals that you have are bigger than just the podcast, right? It's a whole, you have a media ecosystem. So, can you also touch on that a little bit?
Absolutely. So our sponsorships typically are 360 packages. What I mean by that is when we're working with a brand partner to share their offer or service or product with our community, whatever it might look like, we typically try to integrate with them on multiple platforms. So that means they might have an appearance on our podcast, whether that's as a sponsored interview, which by the way, this is also an important point. I just want to side tangent, like make clear to your listeners if you're going to do sponsored interviews, it is really important that that is a transparent process for both the guest and for the listener. I think a lot of the bad rep that sponsored interviews get in this industry is that people are invited to come on podcasts as if they were being given an earned media opportunity, and then people bait and switch them, right? Like after the interview is recorded, they're like, oh, by the way, it's going to cost you like $2,000 for your podcast to be published. Like that is absolutely unethical behavior and not okay. So when I'm talking about sponsored episodes, I want to be really clear that the vast majority of the content we create, so like all of our case study content that we release on Mondays, that's all editorial content, meaning we are seeking out guests for the show or they are applying to be on the show and we're choosing certain case studies to feature. And our guests are not paying a dime to have their interview to be published and to be shared with our community. However, on Wednesdays, we have bonus episodes that sometimes we'll release. Those are free for the public to consume. And those sometimes are sponsored episodes where there are guests who maybe want to talk about things that don't fit into the format of our typical case study structure. Like maybe they're an expert in AI and they want to talk through, the 5-part framework for how to get found on AI chats, right? Like those types of conversations won't fit with our typical free editorial content, but we still find value in the content. So we want to give people the chance to have those sponsored episodes. So when we do things like that, we always start out the episode with a clear, like, the following is a sponsored episode so that our listeners have that transparency as well. So that's kind of a side tangent, but I think it's a really important conversation that's not had a lot. So I wanted to, take the time to explain that. But outside of the podcast, sometimes people appear in ads, sometimes it's more of an interview style. We also have our newsletter. That's where a bulk of our sponsorship packages actually reside, like either newsletter ads or dedicated marketing emails that we'll send for a brand partner. We also do social deliverables. So, we've done a lot of fun campaigns over the years with different brands where we create content on their behalf. Sometimes it's UGC content that, they buy usage rights for. Sometimes it's content that we post and share with our community. So there's a whole 360 cycle. And then sometimes, like with our big event that we hosted last fall, we have in-person activations too. So a sponsor might also have like a branded booth in our marketplace, or they might be part of our gift bags, or they might be part of like our stage design set. So there's so many different ways that we can monetize with sponsorships, but we really try to make it like a holistic experience every time.
Yeah, I love that 360 view. And I'm also wondering, with the shift to having a more premium podcast, did you feel any sort of, I don't know what the right word is. Were you nervous to roll this out? I mean, like you said, there's not many podcasts in the business space that are premium or paid.
Yeah.
So what did that, maybe the mindset side of things, go into? And I know you were a business coach in the past and have great business strategies. So I mean, what did that look like too?
This is such a great question, Haley, because I think anytime you do something new or different, it's going to feel a little bit scary, right? I think nerves sometimes can be viewed as a bad thing. They're probably actually a good thing. It like means that you're trying something a little bit outside your comfort zone. So, for sure, I was, wondering how people might receive the announcement. I have been very, very lucky so far that the response to this shift has been all positive, actually. I'm sure there might be private conversations that I'm not privy to where people maybe didn't like the direction change, but it hasn't reached me, I guess. And so I am very grateful to our community for their support. I think a lot of that has to do with it's kind of like the law of reciprocity, right? Like we have poured 6 years of time and money into creating the best possible content for our listeners. And so to only now start charging for this type of content after 6 years of doing it for free, I think people are a lot more, I guess, open and receptive to it than maybe if we had right out the gate having no proof of concept been like, we want to charge you for this content, you know? So it's like we've built that relationship and that trust with our people over time. So I think that definitely influenced it. But certainly it was, just something where I didn't know what to expect, to be honest, because there isn't a lot of precedent, like you said, in this category. And so I knew it was going to be a slow build. Like I was not expecting it to be like a floodgate of people subscribing. We have a really great core subscriber base that has joined, and we're not in a rush either. I think that's something I had to really fine tune with my own mindset is like, if the point of this is to make this show sustainable for the long term, then I cannot treat this like a 6 week launch where I'm like, you know, all like full speed ahead and burn myself out and I'm like trying to do the biggest launch ever. It can't be like that. It needs to be like truly just a flow. Like every day, every week, we're talking about our podcast in some capacity and our premium subscription. And the right people over time, I have to trust will find their way into the subscription. And if they feel our content is valuable enough to continue paying for, they'll stay. And if they don't, then we need to figure out how we can continue to improve our content.
Yeah, and a mistake I see in this area a lot is people that have like a Patreon. I mean, Patreon's been
Yeah.
around forever,
Yeah.
and they what they do is they put out the episode like a day early or 2 days early and then post the whole thing to their feed, and it's like that's tough. That's gonna be a tough sell for someone who can listen to it for free in 2 days, right? But what you're doing, I think, is really cool of sharing, like, a highlight piece of the episode on the feed, on the RSS feed, and then the full length is available under the paywall or behind the paywall.
Exactly. Yes. And, we're still playing with like, what is the right amount to share in the public feed for free, right? One thing we were really adamant about, and this is something that this, if anything, was the only piece that we got a little pushback on, not from our listeners, actually, just like when I was, seeking input from other podcasters and other peers, a lot of them were like, you should start like a totally separate private podcast for the premium subscription, right? Like make it a totally different show. And I was like, actually, that's not what I want to do, because that the whole point, right, of making this more sustainable is to streamline our operations and actually get paid for the work we do. Adding an entirely new second show would do the opposite of that. It would only double our workload and we would still essentially be getting paid the same amount because you'd be spreading out the same amount of money over two shows now. And so I was like, that is not the vision I have. Like we're known for our case studies on Cubicle to CEO, and that's what I want to continue to be known for. And so for us, it's the same show, just in two different feeds, the public feed and the premium feed. And we wanted to make that very clear from the get-go. And so we're still kind of playing around with like, how much do we publish on the public feed every week? Right now, our average case study episode, I would say, is between like 45 to 50 minutes, sometimes up to an hour, sometimes a little bit less, and it's like 35 minutes, but average 45 to 50 minutes. And so our previews right now run anywhere between, I would say, 15 to 20 minutes. So like almost half of the episode. But as things progress, as we get feedback from people, like if we feel like we need to extend that a little bit or even shorten it a little bit, like we're very open to playing around with that.
I think that's great. Just that curiosity first mindset and continuing to see what works, especially when something is new. And I think that's really, really cool.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, how has your relationship with podcasting changed throughout the 7 years that you've been doing it? Starting from a hobbyist to now having a paid podcast. What's that relationship like?
If I'm being honest, I think that it has ebbed and flowed a lot. And I think that probably is a common experience for anyone doing anything for a long time. And what I mean by that is there have been times where I have been so creatively energized by our podcast and like I am obsessed. Like it's all I want to do. And there are other times where it honestly feels like an obligation, like, oh, we gotta, get this ready for this week and make sure it goes out on time. And I feel like it would be dishonest to represent it as anything other than that because at the end of the day, us as podcasters, like, while yes, of course, there's inherently like a passion for this form of medium or storytelling, it is also for many of us a job, right? It is whether a marketing function job, like because it helps sell into your services or products on the back end, or whether, like me, it is your actual revenue model. Regardless, a job is a job. And we are lucky, I think, as entrepreneurs to get to choose our jobs and get to really shape what our jobs look like. But I think it would be unfair to pretend that work is always sunshine and rainbows, even if it's the work that you choose and that you generally enjoy. And so that's my honest answer is that there are times when I really love it. And there are times where it does feel more like just a responsibility to get through. But I think being really intentional with the relationship with our listeners and making sure that we always put quality at the forefront of what we're creating has made it so that I feel just as committed to the work, regardless of how I personally feel in that moment about the enjoyment of it.
Yeah, and I saw on your website for the premium podcast, you are also, if they have an Instagram, you're adding them to
Yeah.
your private story, and I think that is such a smart way to continue to connect with your listeners. This is a really big pain point for a lot of podcasters is who is listening and are they enjoying it? And who are they, right? Like, and you are doing a great job at like bringing them into your inner circle.
This was also a very intentional move. And beyond the private stories, because I'll be honest, like I'm not the most active person on stories. So that's kind of a practice I'm still getting into. But more than anything, it's actually been a group chat that has been the best part of this entire shift for me personally. Like it has been so much fun to see the friendships formed between fellow listeners and the amazing conversations they have separate from even what we facilitate. Like, just to give you an example, Haley, I remember when we had like our early subscriber bonus episodes that were in the feed, there was one about revenue stacking and how we do that in our business. And I remember one of our amazing subscribers, premium subscribers, she actually was like, hey, would anybody want to get on like almost like a co-working call and brainstorm through like how we can apply this concept in our own businesses, how we can uniquely revenue stack in our businesses? And a group of them actually got on for a call. I wasn't even there. They were like on a call talking about this episode and like what they can take away and execute in their own businesses. And since then, they've done it as like a more regular thing. Like there was another call recently. And again, I was not on that call, but it was so cool just to be like, wow, there's like real community being formed here that is separate from me. It's not like the Ellen Yin show, right? It's like it's really about them and their relationship with each other. And I think just as much as we sometimes feel lonely as podcast hosts, being like, who is even listening to our show? Like, are we just talking to ourselves in a room? I think podcast listeners feel that same disconnect sometimes. Like we by nature, podcast listening or consumption is a very kind of individual activity. Like you're listening in the car, you're listening on your walk, or like as you're working. There's not a whole lot of times where you're listening with other people and then have some sort of discussion about it, which is why I think platforms like Substack have exploded in recent years. Like our podcast, neither of our podcasts are hosted on Substack, but I see why it has become so popular because people crave that forum to be able to connect with other listeners and share their thoughts, share their ideas, share their questions. And I love that part of being able to be part of a group chat where we can do that.
Yeah, you're right. Podcast listening is a very solo activity. It's
Mhm.
not often, I mean, unless I'm like on a road trip with my mom, like
Right.
we're not going to be listening to podcasts with other people. So, yeah, and I think in the world of entrepreneurship, which is who listens to your show, like that's what we want. right? In different parts of my business, I've needed different types of community. That's
Mhm.
actually the reason I started my first podcast was because I didn't know anyone on the online space and I was starting a business. So the podcast brought me community. This one is still bringing me community. So it's really cool what podcasting can do when you put yourself out there and do these creative ideas that maybe people haven't done before.
Exactly. I feel like that is kind of another piece of what our brand is known for is like we are the experimenters. People tell us all the time they're like you always like have the most interesting good or bad. I mean it could be, it's like not everybody loves our ideas, but it's like you always have the most interesting ideas that you're testing, that you're piloting. Like I see you do something first and then I see other people, start to play with it. And I'm like that's what I want. Like I'm definitely not that type of person that's like, oh, like we did this first. So like nobody else can have their chance. No, it's like I love to experiment and then I love to share what worked well in the experiment. And then I love for other people to try it themselves and for us to all share that knowledge. Like that's how we grow and evolve because all of our experiments and experiences, even if we're doing the same thing, it's all going to have so much nuance to it. And so I love to hear from other people when they're implementing something that they've heard on our podcast or are trying something that they are seeing modeled in our business.
Yeah, and I know this audience is definitely going to come check out your podcast because as podcasters and as business owners, our podcast isn't always like the main focus of what we do.
Mhm.
Now it is for you being this media company. It
Right.
is for me being a podcast producer, but for most of my clients, it's just like a marketing tool or a sales tool or somewhere to share their ideas. It's not their main focus.
Mhm.
So I think seeing a podcast like yours can be really, really inspirational for them.
I would also encourage anyone listening in like my best, most creative ideas come from being in rooms and seeking inspiration from businesses that are completely different than my own. So I think it's actually in your favor if you're listening to this and you're like, well, podcasting is just like a part of my marketing arm, or maybe it's even just like a fun hobby. And you're like, I actually don't really care about monetizing it in any way. I feel like just being in parts of different spaces where you can observe how other people do things, especially if they're different from your own business, that's where you're really going to get your most genius ideas that like help you stand out in crowded spaces. And it's the same reason why in my not personal life, I guess all of it's my personal life, but like in my other aspects as an entrepreneur, like I'm not just a podcaster, right? Or I don't just have an online business. I'm also an angel investor in a lot of other startups in different industries like tech and consumer packaged goods and beverage. And even I recently like wrote a small check to like a mobile service provider, like literally like they white label T-Mobile. Like that has nothing to do with anything I do at Cubicle to CEO, but I just love to learn business from so many different angles. And even with buying our clothing resale store, like a brick and mortar, I've learned so much about business just in the month that I've had that's completely different than what I've learned in online business. And so I think just exposing yourself to a wide variety of experiences just makes you a more well-rounded podcaster and a more well-rounded human and entrepreneur where you can bring in these creative ideas that are not common to your industry, but you may have observed in an outside space or industry.
Yeah, if we stay too narrow in what we do, we really do miss a lot of opportunities. So thank you for bringing that up. Ellen, I have loved this conversation and I do have some rapid fire questions for you. But before we get into that, is there anything else you want to share about your business, the podcast, your life, anything?
Yeah, thank you for asking. Well, first of all, I would love for you guys to connect and listen to the show. I am here for your feedback, good or bad, like very, very open to hearing what you're taking away, what you want to see more of. So Cubicle to CEO, wherever you're listening to this podcast, you can add us to your queue. You could also follow us at Cubicle to CEO on Instagram. But if you are curious about like how this premium subscription works, come join us as a premium subscriber, even if it's just for a month. Take a look behind the scenes. I think, again, that's one of the best ways to learn. So if you're curious about joining us as a subscriber, it's $17 a month, at least now. And you can go to cubicletoceo.co/podcast to learn more about becoming a subscriber. But other than that, just, yeah, I love to hear from you. So send me a DM and we can talk.
Amazing. I will put all those links in the show notes. And yeah, you're so generous with everything that you do. I feel like being like, yes, come look and learn how it works from me is, yeah, I think that's what makes you a great business owner. And I know a lot of people are, they don't want to give away too much because they're afraid people will copy them. Well, I think someone could copy you and not be the same as you. You know what I mean? Like, and I think the same about me and any business. Like you said earlier, there's no two results will be the same from doing the same thing with different business structures. So I love that. I think that's a great way to approach all things online business.
Thank you, Haley. I agree 100%. I think it's not that competition is a bad thing. This is actually an interesting conversation I had with my friend Haley who works at Kit, which is an email marketing platform if you're not familiar. But anyway, we were talking about like what are the entrepreneur isms that people say that we feel like we don't actually agree with, and one of hers was actually the popular saying like community over competition. And she was like, I don't think competition is actually an inherently bad thing, but it doesn't have to be an either or, right? It's like I believe so strongly in collaboration, and I believe there is value in striving in competition to, even if it's just to best yourself, right? There is like an inherent quality about that that makes you produce better work or be a better person. And so I think both can coexist, and I think that there's more than enough room for everybody to thrive, and there's also so much uniqueness to each of us that really it's pointless, I think, to like live in this scarcity land where you're like, oh, so and so copied me and did this or that. It's like, who cares? Like just like they're never going to be you no matter how much they copy you, because you're just, there's so many lived experiences that you have that inform how something comes across that nobody can ever replicate from you.
There's a podcast, Make Shift Happen, and she
Mm,
always says, like, the only thing people can take from me is notes or something like that. I'm like, that is it's so funny. But
that's
yes,
amazing.
I know, so funny. I am going to the KIT conference. You're a speaker there, right?
Yes, I am. I'll be keynoting and I'm also leading a workshop. So I'm very excited. They're a wonderful company. It's a wonderful event. It's called Craft and Commerce. If any of you want to join us in Boise.
Okay, some rapid fire questions. I'm
Yes,
excited
I'm
to get into
ready.
with you. Okay, so my first one is, do you remember the first podcast that you ever listened to?
Oh, that's so good. I want to say this is embarrassing, but I want to say it was actually the first podcast I was a guest on because I just was not familiar with podcasts. So, for some context, in 2017, this was right after I graduated college. So, I wasn't even in business or an entrepreneur at all. But my friend Julie Solomon had started her podcast, the Influencer Podcast. And I was episode like 19 or something. And at the time, again, I was a recent college grad, a fitness blogger, like literally nothing to do with what I do today. But I was on that podcast and I thought it was so cool. Like I was not familiar with this world. So obviously I listened to my episode when it came out. So that might have been the first podcast.
Very cool, very cool. I think it'd be so fun to go back and listen to that. I'll find it, I'll put it in the show notes, but I always find that, like, my first podcast appearances, I'm like, "Oh god."
Oh, trust me, it's like you won't even recognize my voice. I sound like a mouse. But you know what? I think Julie recently restructured her show. So I'm not sure that my interview still exists on that show for rightful reasons. Like it has nothing to do with her show anymore. But if you can find it, for sure, you can you can put it in there. But I don't think it's out there anymore.
Okay, so funny. Okay, awesome. As a podcast listener, do you have any pet peeves?
Yes. When a host interrupts the guests repeatedly. Also, when people do not enunciate their words and speak into the mic, like when their volume ebbs and flows repeatedly throughout a sentence and they kind of like drop off, huge pet peeve.
Yeah, no, I agree. I interviewed someone and he was like, "If I have to touch the volume while I'm listening to a podcast episode, I'm done." I was like, "Fair, fair."
Yeah. I'm a little bit more lenient than that, but like, please, people, don't be scared of the mic. Get right up on it. Yeah.
100%. Okay, current day, do you have any favorite podcasts that you like to recommend people listen to, other than your own, of course?
Yes. One of my favorite shows I've listened to very consistently over the last 2 years is the Money with Katie show by Katie Gaddy Tossin. And her show actually is I guess, now on hiatus for an indefinite amount of time. She started a new show called Diabolical Lies. I have not listened into that one yet, but her show, I mean, has an extensive back catalog. You could be listening for years. So highly recommend that show. It's so well produced. The content is so deep and well researched, and she's a fantastic host and great at asking questions.
Okay, I'll put that in the show notes too. What is one thing you wish more people knew about podcasting?
That it's something that just because you enjoy listening to podcasts or even being on podcasts does not mean that you have to or should be a podcast host. I think there's a lot of excitement around podcasting. So it's like everybody wants to start a podcast, but I would really encourage people to think through, like, what is the purpose of this podcast? Is this truly just a passion project? Which it totally can be a successful show if that's all it is to you, but it is a huge commitment. It is much, much harder as a content medium than almost any other content medium. And so to be consistently producing content, at least. And so I think just give yourself permission to really think through, like, do I actually want to commit to such an endeavor? Or might you be better served just being on other people's shows if that's what you truly enjoy, is just like yapping on a mic, you know?
Yeah, like a podcast tour or a podcast guesting strategy can definitely be all that some people need. So I think that's a great shout out there. My last question for you is, over the past 7 years that you've been podcasting, what is the most surprising thing that podcasting has taught you about yourself?
Ooh, that's a really great question. I I don't know if I have been, like, shocked by any revelations maybe from podcasting. I think it really leans into all the things that I have loved since childhood: conversation, storytelling, interviews, relationships. It's been one of the best networking tools I've ever had, just like you said, Haley, earlier. If anything, okay, this is a very unserious answer to this question, but I will say this is my own pet peeve for myself. So I apologize if once you hear this, you can't unhear it if you start listening to my show. I have this weird tick where I've noticed this, where in every episode that I record, there is, and it's a different word every time, but I inevitably latch on to some random word and it gets repeated like 1,000 times, but just in that conversation. So, for example, today I was interviewing someone and I noticed myself constantly saying love. I was like, oh, I absolutely love that. I love that. I love that. I'm like, oh my gosh, pick a different word, any word. And then, like, in another episode, I was like, oh, I constantly am saying absolutely, absolutely, or like 100%, 100%. So it's like this weird, like, tick that I get stuck in this loop, but it ends. Like, after the interview is done, by the time I record my next one, it doesn't happen again, or it's like a totally different word. So that's kind of like a funny insider story. I don't think I've ever actually said that out loud before, but that has been a surprise to me that I have learned about myself.
That is so funny. I wonder what that is. I feel like I have words like that too, but it's not just like one single episode. It's like all throughout my, my podcast. Thank God for editing, because otherwise I say like all the time. And I think it's something I've been more conscious of, but it happens.
It's so odd. It really is. Like, I don't have as big of an issue saying certain filler words such as like, or of course I still say them, but it's not as deep, I think, as some people may experience. But yeah, that weird one word thing, definitely a weird quirk of mine.
No, I love it. I love it. Oh my gosh, Ellen, this has been so much fun. I'm so glad that we finally got to connect. I have actually a funny story that I was saving till the end of this for you.
Please.
My family hosts this convention every year in Las Vegas at the Westgate Hotel. You are always at the, what is it, Mrs. America Awards?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So wait.
I was there. It's always the same weekend. I walked by you once and I was like, was that? And I've only seen you on like one event and on social media. I was like, was that Ellen? I was like, what's happening here?
I am dying, Haley. Oh my gosh. Okay, so just so our listeners have like an idea of what the heck we're talking about, In 2024, I competed in my first ever and only pageant. I competed at state, right? It was for the Mrs. America system, which is different than Miss America. Miss America is like a scholarship program and you age out, I think, when you're like 24 or 26. Mrs. America is like the oldest pageant system for married women in the United States. And so I competed at Mrs. Oregon. I won Mrs. Oregon, and I then went on to compete at Mrs. America in August of 2024 at the Westgate because that's where they host it every year. So I am dying, Haley, that you saw me somewhere. I was probably like rushing to rehearsal, like completely unaware of my surroundings.
You were like on a mission, dressed to the nines. I was like, what is going on?
You're like, is this like a Matrix moment? Like, what are you doing here? And like, yeah, exactly. So that's funny. What is the convention that your family hosts or that attends?
Yeah, they host one. It's for naturopathic doctors. If you
Okay.
ever go back, it's always the same weekend, and it has been for years as Mrs. America, but I never just see anyone that I've know there.
No, yeah.
It was so funny. I was like, if I see her again, I'm gonna say something, but I never saw you again the
Oh
whole weekend.
no.
So
I am literally chuckling. That's really funny, actually. So thank you for sharing that story.
I was like, I have to let her know, but oh my gosh. What a way to end the episode.
My one and only time at the Westgate, y'all. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I have loved this conversation.
Thank you, Haley. It's been a joy.
Thank you so much for joining me in the Podcast Cafe. I hope you're leaving with fresh ideas and inspiration to take your podcast to the next level. Remember, podcasting is a journey and you don't have to do it alone. I'm here to help you every step of the way. Let's connect. Be sure you follow me on Instagram at Espresso Podcast Production or visit espressopodcastproduction.com for more tips, resources, and behind the scenes insights. I'd love to hear about your podcasting journey. If you've enjoyed today's episode, make sure you hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you're feeling extra generous, I'd love it if you could leave me a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps more podcasters just like you find the show. Until next time, grab your coffee, keep creating, and I'll see you back here in the Podcast Cafe.